Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Here we go, ready to finally talk about our lymphatic vessels. And I think the first thing for us to mention is a significant difference between the lymphatic and the circulatory system is that the circulatory system is described as a closed system, meaning the blood is always in a vessel or the heart, right? In the case of the lymphatic vessels, we have like a start point or an entry, and we have an exit. So we have an entry, which is the lymphatic capillary. And we have an exit, which is going to be the left and right subclavian veins. And this is right into the bloodstream, correct? Alrighty, so let's take a look at this diagram from our OpenStax textbook, which remember is linked in your video description. And we're seeing a familiar structure, hopefully. We can see the arteriole, which leads to the blood capillary, which leads to the venule. And we see that this is there in context with the tissue of the body. But then added on to this diagram that we've seen before are these green vessels, which are listed here, labeled as the lymphatic capillary, the lymph capillary. And so remember, this is our starting point, our entry into the lymphatic system. So let's go ahead and list out our lymphatic capillary as our starting point. Now, what we're going to see with the structure of the lymphatic capillary is that we have a large diameter. The capillary can be described as a blind pocket, which means it just starts here in the body. So it's not a circuit, it's not connected on both ends to vessels. We just have a starting point, like a pocket here, right? And we can see that in our diagram. If we take a look at our kind of close up view, we can see just that blind pocket close up. So just is a place where the vessel begins. When we look at our location of our lymphatic capillary, we are seeing them close to, as we see in our diagram, the arterioles, the blood capillary, and the venule. And remember, we've said that the lymphatic capillary is the entry point. So what's entering? When we think back to our cardiovascular system and we recall that water, nutrients, electrolytes, etc., are filtered out of the blood capillary at the arterial end. And it flows, all of that material flows across the tissue and gets recollected, or it enters back into circulation at the venule end of the capillary. About 3 liters of that fluid goes into the lymphatic capillary instead. So you have fluid leaving the bloodstream, becoming part of our interstitial fluid, or what I like to simply call ECF, or extracellular fluid. And then from there, it moves into the lymphatic capillary. Once it enters into the lymphatic capillary, that's when we call it lymph. Going back to the structure of the lymphatic capillary, what we'll see is the reason material moves in is because of a pressure difference. So we'll have a high extracellular pressure and materials moving into the lower lymphatic capillary pressure. because we know that fluid is moving from a high to a low pressure. Once that material gets in, it doesn't get out. So the wall of the capillary is composed of a single layer of endothelial cells. Remember, endothelial is talking about simple squamous epithelium that's found lining these internal places in the body. And then those cells overlap to create valves. Okay, so we are looking at the arrangement of those endothelial cells. So they are stacked in such a way that material can push open the valve in order to enter. But when it comes time to try to exit, that forces those valves to, or those cells to close up that gap. And so because we create sort of this large gap here in these overlapping cells, this allows pretty large stuff to enter the capillary. So we're getting water, we're getting electrolytes, we're getting nutrients that need to be brought back into the circulatory system. We're going to see pathogens potentially can enter here as well. When we are talking about the digestive tract, we'll talk about the lacteal, which is a special lymphatic capillary located in the small intestine and important in the transport of dietary lipids and lipid-soluble vitamins. From the lymphatic capillary, we'll see that material is going to move into larger, so progressively larger lymphatic vessels. And the structure of the lymphatic vessel is very similar to the vein. So the structure is going to be similar to a vein, and it's going to have valves to promote that unidirectional movement. So just like with the vein, we don't see a lot of musculature to the vessel itself. So we don't have a pump and we don't have a lot of muscle to the lymphatic vessel. So we don't have a way of really pushing that lymph through. We will see, what do I want to say here? We will see the skeletal muscle, the surrounding skeletal muscle is going to move the lymph. So that's going to be really important in helping to squeeze the lymph through the system, just like with the veins. And just like with the veins, once you get to a certain point, the valve shuts, so you don't get that backflow. When we look at these larger lymphatic vessels, we'll see that you're going to have like superficial and deep. So you're going to get superficial large vessels. Are going to be more like following the veins in terms of their anatomy and their location. Whereas the deep vessels are more like following the arteries, again, in terms of their anatomy, meaning their location in the body. You should consider if the body has made room for the passage of blood vessel, we don't want to make like a whole nother area for lymphatic vessels. And we don't want to make a whole nother area for nerves. So very often we'll see that your blood vessels, your nerves, your lymphatics are all, moving in the same kind of general area to get into those different areas of our body, those different regions of the body. The other thing that we want to make note of here is as the lymph is flowing through these larger vessels, it's going to flow through a lymph node. And the lymph node is going to be discussed in more detail in the future. But right now we can think about it as a lymph filter. You have something like 500 to 600 present in the body. And they're going to be concentrated where you have possible entry and exit of material, because that means possible entrance for pathogens. So this would be, for instance, in your groin area, armpit, and then in both your thorax and abdomen. And you should consider that when we talk about it as a lymph filter, we're filtering out approximately, let's say 99.9% of pathogens. And this is important because before too long, this lymph is going to make its way directly into your circulation. And so you don't want to be circulating pathogens along with your oxygen and your nutrients, right? The way I'm understanding and thinking about this is that your lymph goes into the lymphatic capillary, progressively gets in larger and larger vessels, and periodically along the way, it comes to a lymph node, and it moves through the lymph node, and pathogens are filtered out. And then the lymph is back in a vessel, flowing, and it comes to another lymph node, and it goes through that lymph node again. And so I'm imagining as we're moving through the lymphatic vessels, there's these periodic stops sort of as we go through these lymph nodes to filter out that lymph. From our larger lymphatic vessels, we move into what's called a lymphatic trunk. So let's do, let's go ahead and do like larger lymph vessels. And then we go into what's called the lymphatic trunk. And then what we will see is the right head, the right thorax, the right upper appendage, drains into what's called the right lymphatic duct. And then this dumps into the right subclavian vein. And so now we're back in circulation. Whereas the left side of the head, the left thorax, the left upper appendage, and then I'm just going to say all else, all the other parts of the body are draining into what's called the thoracic duct. And the thoracic duct is dumping into the left subclavian vein. Let's also go ahead and mention what's called the cisterna chyli. Cisterna chyli. So what we'll see is that this is a sac-like chamber. It's located beneath the diaphragm. And it's actually draining all of the lymph from the left and right lumbar trunk and the intestinal trunk. So I'm going to actually draw arrows into the cisterna chyli from the left and right lumbar trunk and intestinal trunk. So the cisterna chyli then is dumping into the thoracic trunk, which is then dumping into the left subclavian vein. The thoracic duct and the right lymphatic duct are hitting into the subclavian veins, right kind of in between where the jugular and the subclavian veins are entering in. So we'll see that in some of our diagrams. If your lymph is not moving through your system, if there's a blockage, we call this lymph edema. Now, lymph edema is when you have accumulation of fluid in your body tissues. And this can be due to a lymphatic system blockage. In some cases, it could be a parasite that's blocking that vessel. So there are some worms in particular that will sort of take up residence in the lymphatic system, and they can block that whole region, and a fluid can accumulate into appendages, for instance. Just doing a quick check. I think up next we have our lymphatic tissues and organs. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.